Welcome to the first ever live recording of the Cyber Go-to-Market Talk podcast. And doing this today for the first time, hoping that content is actually what matters here rather than production or glitch-free streaming, because I'm looking at the screen right now, wondering what half these buttons do. And if things start flashing at me, I'm just going to start clicking them and hopefully it's going to fix whatever problems we have. If it feels like this is done by a beginner, it is done by a beginner. So give us a little bit of grace about it as we get through this. We're recording this on Friday, the 16th of May. If you're having to listen to the recording, it's a bright, sunny day here in Colorado. And as always, Cyber Donut needs some help. It needs some guidance. We're trying to get to that $10 million ARR by the end of the year. And it's time that we got the professionals in. We found someone who understands sales culture, who knows how to execute a sales go-to-market motion, knows about big deals, knows about selling value, collaborating internally, and is a thoughtful and insightful sales leader, which is why I'm pleased to be joined today by Robert Amezcua, the SVP of Worldwide Sales at Forescout. Rob, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. It sounds like a lot of pressure that's building on us here, but I'm glad all the buttons on your side. So you've got more of the pressure than I do.
Yeah, I don't know. I must be able to transfer them over, though. Delegate. That's what I
No.
need to do. Delegate some responsibility of this over to you. Oh, dear. As always, I'm Andrew Monahan, and this is the Cybersecurity Go-to-Market podcast, where we tackle the question, how can Cyber Donut get to $10 million in ARR by the end of 2025? Firstly, I've got to thank Evan Dornbush, who is a multi-time founder. He listens to the podcast. I met with him at RSA, and he said, you got to do a live session. You got to do one of these live things at some time. So I appreciate the encouragement from Evan to get this done. And also to Danny Wolf, who's the co-founder at Cyber Synapse, for putting me onto the software Restream, which we're using to run this service. So thanks, Evan, and thanks, Danny, for the support and the tool to get this all done. But enough about me and the podcast. Let's go to Rob. Rob, let's learn a little bit more about you. As always, I have 49 questions here, believe it or not. And what we're going to do is actually spin the magic wheel. And this wheel uses advanced random number generators, which actually the algorithm is protected by Ozempic encryption. It's not the full stuff. It's slightly lighter than usual. And there's no way it can be hacked. So whatever numbers come out, we're going to read the questions that these numbers correspond to. You ready to go?
Let's give it a spin.
I'm going to press the button here. You probably won't hear the wheel going, but there is a big wheel right beside me, and it's going to pick up the numbers. So bear with me while I press it.
Do you want me to do the tick, tick, tick thing too?
No. Right there. Okay, we've got number 6, Rob. How did you make money as a kid?
How did I make money as a kid? Oh, boy. Well, every which way possible. I think I had quite a few lemonade stands. I think I, peddled some baseball cards, mowed some lawns, probably was the top seller at every single garage sale that we had in the neighborhood. And, was always looking for a deal. That was pretty much my early stage youth and probably my early days of learning to be a seller.
And did you think about doing that as a career, starting a whole big business around Texas to do this?
No, I walked around actually with that experience and realized that I didn't want to become a seller. I wanted to be a doctor instead, but thankful Baylor University weeded me out early, and they robbed the world of a hell of a doctor, but gave him a mediocre sales guy instead. So there you go.
You're doctor of selling. That's what you became.
Doctor
All right, let's go with number 2. Press the button. Number 38. What's an embarrassing or memorable moment in your sales career?
Well, every loss I've ever taken, I can assure you, was an embarrassing moment for them, and there's quite a few of them. But and if you don't count my recent stay in a Chicago hotel where the drapes didn't quite close as far as I wanted, and there was a gym right across the street that could see through my windows, and you don't count that as an embarrassing moment, then I would say that most of my embarrassing moments, thankfully, have been treated with grace and forgiveness, and most people have a short memory with respect to them. So I've been able to survive most all of them.
There's a story that's actually true. At the Denver airport, I live in Denver. There's a Westin hotel at the Denver airport, and this pilot was stayed overnight, got up the next morning, getting dressed in his room, didn't realize that the whatever it was, the net curtains, not the full or whatever. He actually got arrested. Someone
Oh,
complained that he was flashing from the window or something. He's standing there getting dressed, and it
yeah.
was actually a curtain, but not the full one. And it was all in the papers and everything here. So you got to be careful with these things that you don't. Someone will take offense to anything these days, it seems.
Yeah. When I had that episode in Chicago, I had flowers and bottles of wine delivered to my door afterwards. So I don't know what people saw, but I think they treated me a little differently.
Was it was it the blind school across the road or something? Is that
I
what it
think it
was?
was. Yeah, it was something like that.
All right, third question. Tick 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 tick. Number 28. What is the story behind you getting into your first job in cybersecurity?
Oh, great question. Um, well, I started out as a door-to-door telecom sales guy, which after about 3 months of doing that in a suit and tie in the sweltering Texas heat, I quickly realized that number one, I was not very good at it. Number two, I wasn't very passionate about selling long distance door to door back then. And number three, my fingers were quite sore from getting all the doors slammed on them. And there was this little company called Network Associates that was starting up a Dallas based office. And I'm still very thankful to this day for Tom Judd and Vince Kearns taking a chance on a young guy like me and basically giving me an opportunity when I went over there. And we went into this random building and these mass interviews. And I walked in there and I had a pulse and a warm temperature and, some shoes on my feet. And they basically said, you know what, can you answer a phone? I said, yes, I can. And they said, do you know what a fax machine is? I said, no, but I can learn. And they said, well, okay, well, do you know how to pick up POs? And I was like, I can learn that too. And they said, well, you're hired. And that's how I got into cybersecurity. I was blessed and fortunate and still thank those guys every single day for giving me a chance. And I've never left the business and will probably never will.
Yeah, and I think cyber's done better than long distance phone lines over the years, right?
Much better, much better. I worked for WorldCom, if that tells you anything. And, I don't think they're even around these days, but
For good reason, apparently.
for good reason. Yeah, for good reason.
Well, actually, it's interesting. You mentioned Network Associates days. We're going to go back to those days. For those that are listening who their career doesn't go back 25 years like Rob and I's does, there was a company called Network Associates. It was different business lines in there. There was an AV one called McAfee. There was a security business line called PGP, and we had a bunch of things in there. And then there was a network management called Sniffer and a help desk called Magic. And you and I were both in the PGP security business unit literally 25 years ago this month. But something interesting happened. We had a bunch of products in our division, one of which was something called PGP Command Line, which is basically a command line encryption tool. And it was exactly what it says in the tin, right? You'd go to command line, you'd type some commands, you'd encrypt things and decrypt them and things like that, all from a command line. The least user-friendly thing you could imagine. And we used to sell it for, I think, like $100 or $200 a license. And if you're lucky, you sold 2 or 3 licenses, right? This was not a high-ticket item. However, despite all that, Rob, I think you were the one that kind of figured out, actually, we might be able to sell this for a little bit more because you could understood how people were using it. And so began a journey that lasted a few years about selling the PGP command line for more. Take us back to that moment. What was the realization? You realized there was some value here beyond just something called an encryption command line tool.
Yeah, no, those are good days. And by the way, kudos to you for remembering all those different moving parts of what Network Associates was. And I mean, I don't know if you did some research before that or if you actually just remembered, but
It's
that's
imprinted in my
fantastic.
brain.
That's fantastic. There's 2 parts to that really, and one part's quite funny because you never know as a sales leader how powerful, potentially demeaning, or in some cases, and in this case, motivating your words can be. We had a sales leader at the time. I'll keep him nameless, who found out that I was selling this PGP command line, sort of product, and came over to my desk one day and said, hey, you're the guy that sells this PGP command line or whatever. And I said, yes. And he said, man, you have got to have the most difficult and worst job in this company, because PGP command line, exactly like you just described. I mean, you're selling code. You're selling like this one line of code. I mean, there is no UI. There's nothing sexy about it. It's just basic line code for encryption. Which is like the least sexiest thing on the planet. And I could have taken that statement or that interaction with him one of two ways. I took it as a motivator, and I was like, well, I'm going to show this guy that I may have the worst job of this company, but I'm going to make the most of it. And you're right. I then started to really kind of dig into, well, what do people do with this? And what is kind of the value behind this? And, I started talking to my customers rather than just making it a transaction. I made it an interaction, with respect to, can you help me understand what you guys do with this? And then I learned that, a lot of the banking entities that we were selling this thing to were, batching up these high value transactions, and they were, running it on these big mainframes or these, other middleware systems, and they were doing these big transfers every night. And then I started asking about the nature of the transfers and the value of the transfers, and come to find out, they're transferring, millions of dollars worth of, EDI transactions, commerce transactions back in the early days, when everything was batch encrypted and all that good stuff. And, I just started thinking about it. I'm like, golly, there's a lot more than a couple $100 worth of value here, based on what these guys are using this for and what's at stake. And, then I just started, this is back in the days when you could sell above list price, I guess, on the price list. I don't know many organizations that probably allow that stuff anymore, but, truth be told, I was doing that. And I just started trying some of those value points. I was like, can I get $1,000 for this thing? And people gladly paid. And could I get $1,500 for it? And people gladly paid. And next thing you know is, could I get $2,400 for this? And strangely, as you can imagine, I realized my quota actually went by way faster. The higher the price point was. And these people were kind of lining up, because they had to have this thing, they needed this thing, and there was a lot of value unlocked there. So it's, and then, to your point, I was thankful, I was gracious enough, I should say, to share that with my other peer sellers who also started doing the same.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, it became a bigger business than I think anybody ever imagined.
Oh, for sure. In fact, I remember
you ran that business.
Yeah, well, we both kind of
You
ran
can
it
thank
for
me for that.
4 or 5 years, right? And we kind of built it up from $200 a license to a $50 million business in just 2 or 3 years, which was a lot of fun. I remember this story. I think it was the RD up in the Northeast, and he was saying that one of his reps got a Bluebird for this stuff. And I was thinking, Bluebird for this, I don't know, maybe 10K, 15K, something like that, right? No, her Bluebird was like $750,000 or something like that.
Yeah.
Someone, I think it was Verizon Business, called up and said, I've got this PO. How do I post it with you guys? Mm-hmm. And she said, how much is it for? And she said, it was $750,000. I was like, what?
Yeah.
So you took something that was, just very, very low dollars into something that people would spend a lot of money on because of what it was used for. I remember going to a bank up in the North Central somewhere, and the CIO showed up, and I thought, well, that's weird. That's not normal, right? In the meeting. And, he said like 10 minutes in, he kind of stopped. You realize what we use this for? And I was like, what's that? He goes, well, we process about $40 million a day of transactions using your encryption tool. I was like, oh, wow, we should probably keep selling this stuff.
Yeah. I remember it was crazy. And it didn't require a ton of development. I think we, ported it to a couple different platforms when we, as the transaction and commerce landscape started to change, but tons of value in that. But just understanding and asking that question. I mean, had we not asked those sorts of questions, first of all, it wouldn't have ever been a big business. Second of all, no telling where the world would have been today. And quite frankly, that value exchange, was worth way more than we ever anticipated. It was just with a couple lines of code and a cardboard box. I don't even know if there was anything in that box, but I remember I had one of the boxes on my desk, just to display the fact that, there was something of value there. And I don't know if I ever reminded that VP of sales that, how much money I made on that business and all that good stuff, but those were good days.
For sure, for sure. If you're in the live stream watching along and you want to ask a question, just go into the chat and it should show up on our screen. I've got a comment here from Ashley Brinsford, the VP of EMEA over for Ireland. I don't know. Robbie's saying, what a great guest. He must be talking about me, surely. Rob is a legend. Hope you're doing well, buddy. So,
Yeah, hope you're
Ashley,
doing
welcome.
well, Ash. Miss you, man. Hopefully you guys are out there crushing the browser landscape.
So let's talk about value, though, in cybersecurity. I've kind of been working on this for a while, and I know you have as well. Often, the feeling is that, if you look at direct value, it's much more about departmental or getting the team working better, or shorter time to IOC to get better productivity. But how do you think about it, Rob, in terms of value, business value of what we sell, and what it would mean for a company?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's a binary equation. You either get it or you don't in a lot of cases. And I think, look, I think the best way to kind of expose, and understand that is, this is where the scoreboard matters. I think if you're not producing a scoreboard with respect to, where your customer is today, the exchange of the transaction, the promises, the expectations, the outcomes that you're seeking, the use cases that you're driving, and then tracking and measuring kind of, what changes as a result, that really is the value equation. And it should be demonstrable. I think it certainly makes everybody's lives easier when it is, but really just trying to understand it. I think we all get caught in this scenario where we think we know what the value is, but the world's a dynamic place. Environments are dynamic, businesses are dynamic, networks are dynamic, infrastructure is dynamic. So while we might see or know or understand a value equation in one place, we might see it redefined readily in another. But if we're not open to that, if we're not looking at that, if we're not thinking about that, if we're not asking about it, then you might not know otherwise. And we might be selling ourselves a little bit short. So I think it's just part of the open conversation, the open dialogue, and being willing to listen to how people actually derive value from your platform versus you wanting to know how they derive from it.
And what I've seen a lot, Rob, is people who have the sellers have the desire to, grow bigger deals and all the rest of it. When they get in the heat of the moment on a sales call, they go back to talking about features and capabilities and letting the conversation just stay there. How do you think about what a rep should be doing to get out of that zone and thinking more about value?
Well, I think it comes down to knowing how people buy, right? I think that's a big part of it. And oftentimes we get caught up. Feature benefits are for technicians. The feature benefit statements are typically for the company. The feature benefits are typically for the competition, right? In terms of how are you attempting to potentially differentiate yourself. But where people tend to see most value in a transaction, or especially in the idea of a bigger deal, they want to know what they're getting for themselves, in return. Are they taking a risk? Or is there a significant benefit statement in the risk that they're going to take? Is there some sort of benefit statement with respect to their career, their standing, their stature, associated with you and the opportunity that you're providing them? And I think in a lot of cases, comes down to the personal nature of it, right? And not just the professional nature of it. I mean, think about that PGP command line conversation we were having. There was no feature or benefit in that conversation, right? It was just about the business and the enablement of that. And, the guy that was on the hook, to your point, with the $40 million worth of transactions, that guy needed those things to go successfully, and he needed to make sure that there wasn't a hacker that was going to go out there and intercept those things, right? That's all that guy cared about. And if he did that, every single day, and that 40 million grew to 80 million, grew to 120 million and 160 million and beyond, that guy was going to be made to look like a hero, right? Because he was helping to enable the business to grow. So, if you went to him and said, well, this deal, is a $10,000 a license or $100,000 a license, as long as he could connect the dots to that trajectory, for him, there would be significant value in that. So, I think it just, you got to broaden the scope a little bit,
Yeah, I think I talked to sellers about how with the power of all the gongs and the choruses and the co-pilots these days, and you could listen to these call recordings, you can see the point in the conversation where you could take it down one path, which is what you talked about, or you take the another one, which is, well, tell me about your process and tell me which tools you're using and tell me how often you use them and what you're happy with, things like that. No, that's a bad conversation, but you're not having a value conversation at that point, right? You
Right.
you have to intentionally say, I want to take it over here.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you might never get back to that spot.
Yeah, and I think, it's not always about, what you do. It's about, what happens if they don't, have some of the things and the attributes and everything else. And, that's where you get a chance to shift the conversation. Everybody always wants, I mean, look, people have this inherent nature. If I sense you've got a problem, I want to race to go solve it. But I may not fully understand your challenge, right? And your surface level problem might not be the same as your deep level problem. And the value unlock, the people that do transaction versus do larger deals, the people that do deals versus build long term partnerships, it lies deeply than more deeply than the surface, right? And so you got to really kind of dig to uncover that.
Yeah, I remember back in those network associates days when we had all those products. I used to default, or unfortunately, I think many did, to what I call buzzword selling. You'd ask a few questions, you'd be listening intently, and then suddenly they'd say something like, "Oh, I do that. Let me let me tell you all about it." Right?
Yeah.
Rather than hitting the brakes and going, "Let me just understand why you're bringing this up and what else it means and things like that." It's you got to slow down or speed up sometimes, I guess.
Yeah. Well, you and I used to have these conversations, back when we were talking about, training and enablement and all this stuff. And I'm sure you probably still do have these conversations a lot. The fine art of curiosity, right? Most people listen with the intent to respond, right? Amazing sellers listen with the intent to question, right? And that practice of curiosity, that they make a statement, leads you to your next question. They give you an answer, leads you to your next level of curiosity, and you just find that point. Now you do that insatiably, it gets annoying, but you do that to a point where you really uncover kind of the root of it, where the real challenge lies, where the real solve, where the real value unlock is. You just got to get a little deeper. And, that practice of curiosity, makes a big difference. Otherwise, you're just being that passive listener with the intent to just respond as quickly as you can. And like you said, that's where the buzzwords come in. The moment they say this, I'm saying this, and I'm going into my whole pitch,
Hmm.
but you might miss most of the message in the process of doing that.
Yeah, for sure. Let's change gears here a little bit, Rob. We're going to talk about comp plans. Last
We're going to
week,
get controversial now. All right, good.
la- last week, I guess the Catholic Church, the Vatican elected a pope, and I made the comment that why does it seem like it's easier and more transparent to elect a pope than it is to get the comp plan out to the sales team every year? What is it? You're being the guts of behind the scenes about creating, refining, aligning comp plans, and you and I've been in situations where we've not got our comp plan until like April, May, sometimes of the calendar sales year, which is nuts. So what goes on behind the scenes that we're as sellers not aware of that means that it takes so long to get these things out?
Oh man, what goes on behind the scenes? A lot. I can tell you that. These conversations typically start in the planning process, which for most organizations is about October, November, and to your point, Andrew, some cases last all the way into April and May. But I'll say, I'll give both sides of it. I would say from a sales leadership perspective and everything else, what happens along this a lot behind the scenes is a whole lot of advocacy on the part of the sales organization, right? I mean, we as sales leaders, hope everybody understands, and I know I speak for my fellow sales leader community. We want everybody to make money. Sometimes everybody always questions, well, I don't know if your comp plan is a reflection of your desire to allow me to make money. Well, every sales leader out there, certainly wants you to make money. So, there's a lot of advocacy that goes on, with respect to that. I think what often people lose sight of is that compensation is a budgeted expense, right? Everybody thinks, well, compensation certainly is a part of the budget or whatever, but it is. And most organizations, have this idea of what they're going to spend with respect to compensation, and you got to go work a model that kind of is, benefits the company and benefits the sellers, and fine tune that stuff in between. I think what really bogs these conversations down is the organization not understanding its true north, right? Because if you think about it, speaking of buzzwords, by the way, let's just play compensation buzzword bingo real fast. Like, in fact, why don't you actually play along here, Andrew? Why don't you throw out some buzzwords associated with a compensation plan that you often hear?
All right. PCRs, one, accelerators, spiffs, attainment, uh, quota credit. What you get paid on is different to quota credit sometimes.
Yeah, yeah,
All these
yeah.
lots of different factors in there.
Yeah, PCR, BCR, ACR, all the CRs, right? All
Net and
the
gross.
commissions. Yeah, net, gross. You've got ACV, you've got TCV, you've got ARR, right? All the ways in which you can count dollars and everything else. And what I think most people don't understand is that is the construct of the plan can't be built to contradict the company goals and vice versa, right? So, a seller might be sitting on an ACV, TCV sort of compensation plan, but if the goal of the company is to actually grow recurring revenue growth, and the compensation plan of the seller is actually in contrast to the actual, company goals. So, got to make sure all those things align. So, if the company doesn't have a true north with respect to how they want the revenue to fall, then the sellers, quite frankly, might be operating at a bit of a point of friction of the company goal. And I think so. Most of the stuff that happens behind the scenes with respect to how do you create one of those things and how do you get it approved and how does everybody get excited about it, it's just about alignment, right? And got to pick what the true north is. If the true north is recurring revenue, then you go create a recurring revenue compensation plan, and you just don't emphasize or pay the same on non-recurring items. If your compensation plan is around ACV or TCV, then you pay people for duration. You do other things, but you just got to make sure you know what you're playing for.
Any favorite comp plan terms or compensation elements that you've seen over the years that you think are at least eyebrow raising?
Well, I mean, I don't know terms, but concepts. I mean, you introduce the concept of caps. I can assure you, you're going to raise some eyebrows. You introduce the concept of no caps, you're going to raise some eyebrows. So I think if you asked any seller out there or anybody that's ever made any money, at least significant money on a compensation plan, it comes down to cap or no cap.
Right.
I don't know how controversial that is, but I mean that's really what it comes down to. And then those rate structures. But the other thing I think everybody needs to understand is that it's all math based. Right? It's those rate structures are all a function of your variable compensation. In relation to your quota. And if you want to go out there and everybody always wants to negotiate a compensation plan. If you want to be in a position to negotiate your compensation plan, you better know what you're negotiating on, because you don't negotiate on the rate, right? What you do is you negotiate on the variable comp and or the quota. Like, just don't go and negotiate the rate, because everything is math based, right? So
Yeah.
there's a little bit of behind the scenes wisdom, and I don't want any of my organization to be listening to this and come back and negotiate all their quotas and compensation rates. So.
Well, however you roll out your comp plan, I remember, oh boy, 20 years ago, we were at a company and a new sales leader came in. What you don't do is what this sales leader did, right? Rehash the comp plan. And basically the big change was we were getting paid rather than grossing up on channel deals, it was all going to be net, right? And rather than just come out and tell us what the differences were and all the rest of it, and actually you can get paid on net rather than gross. The headline that this sales leader did rolling out was, "I'm increasing your PCR." And everyone's, "Oh, this is great. These are getting paid more on deals. This is all going to be awesome, right?" And I remember being in a room with a bunch of salespeople as we are kind of listening, and we're also looking at the comp plan. And the first person goes, "You see the third paragraph down on the second page?" Like, no, and everyone starts looking, and that's when we realized that actually we're going to get paid less because of what we're getting paid on net, not gross, right? And rather than just coming out and be honest and saying what it was, he tried to kind of hide it behind some big headline saying, "I'm paying you more on deals." And it was actually really embarrassing because there's people coming on the call going, "Oh, this is awesome. I'm so glad you're doing this." And, what a great leader. It was like, listening to, North Korea, this is just awesome. And everyone else is literally going, "Have you not read page 3 yet?"
Yeah. Yeah.
One of those moments. All right. So
Yeah. Were
let's
you one of the guys that was excited about it, or were you one of the guys that read the fine print? I mean, which guy were you?
I think I was probably like the third person in the room to get to the fine print and go, "Wait a minute here."
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
no one went on off mute and said, "Excuse me, I've got a question." No one
Yeah.
had the guts to do that. It
I
was
will
like,
tell you, it's funny you say that because I do remember that moment, and I was never a read the fine print guy. Thankfully, I had guys like you that were read the fine print and would send a little email or group message or whatever and notify everybody of like paragraph 3. But I will tell you, there's a lot of people out there that do read the fine print, and in my experience, um, you know, it's always better to basically expose the fine print than it is to get somebody to read it, because you're right, that conversation went from good to bad in a hurry.
distrust, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I think he set himself back actually with the sales team for months and quarters on that.
yeah,
It was like,
big
there's
time.
the guy that tried to pull the wool over our eyes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and when once you lose I mean, salespeople, this as well as I do. We're all skeptics to begin with, right? And but if you do anything to go fuel that skepticism, then boy, you really got your hands full at that point.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move on to hiring. There was a post on LinkedIn from Jason Lemkin in the last week. Jason, for those that know, he heads up SaaStr, founder, CEO of SaaStr, the big company, actually going on this week, actually, in San Francisco. He's a prolific poster on LinkedIn, some of which is spot on, some of which maybe not so much, I think. But here's a post that he did. He says, "Judge me if you will, but I would never hire a sales exec that is slow to follow up during the interview process." And a whole bunch of people chimed in with comments and all the rest of it, some of which were, how you do the little things is how you do the big things, right? Supporting his idea. Another one said, "Quick follow-ups show care and drive. Speed builds trust and closes deals." Another person said, "This is a no-brainer disqualifier of that salesperson in the hiring process." And then someone, well-known person on LinkedIn, said, "It's the worst." So, Rob, is it really the worst if a salesperson is a little bit slow to respond and follow up in the hiring process?
Which one of those comments was yours?
None of them.
You didn't
I'll tell you
comment on
mine in a
that?
minute. I'll tell you my
You didn't
comment.
you didn't comment on that?
I'll tell
I
you
mean,
my
come
comment
on.
in a second.
Everybody knows that you're like one of the best. And if everybody doesn't know this already, anybody that might be listening or see this later, I hope they start following your commentary, because you're one of the greatest LinkedIn commenters I know. Like I love your comments. Um, is it the worst? I I tried not to never say never, and I don't like this idea of the worst or the last or the whatever else. I mean, look, it's situational, maybe. Look, now you're talking to one of the guys who's probably the world's worst follow uppers, because it's just like you don't have a lot of time on your hands to be able to do all that, and the world comes at you fast, personally and professionally. I think situationally, you got a guy that, wants a job, and you need a guy, and everything else, I would expect a fairly quick follow up. But, like, I try and operate with a little forgiveness and grace. And, there's probably a reason for just about everything. And, uh, you know,
What red flags do you look for in your hiring, Rob?
well, you know, when you got guys like us that have been in and around the business for a long time, red flag number one is if I don't know anybody that knows you. We've been in this business way longer than we look, I would imagine, right? So, despite our youthful appearance, we've been around this block a couple times, and we've been blessed to work with people throughout this industry that lead companies, lead the industry, are involved in all aspects of it. And if I can't go draw a indirect line or a direct line to you, then something might be wrong, especially if you're looking to go lead something in and around here. But I look at the human. I look at are people going to be motivated by you? Are people going to be inspired by you? Are people going to be? Are you going to be able to attract? Are you going to be able to retain? Are you going to be able to grow our talent? All the important things. Are you going to be a servant to our people, because that's what we're here for as leaders? Are you are you into that cause? Or is there a selfishness about you? With respect to your mode of operation. So, I might be willing to forgive somebody not having an immediate follow up, but I'm not going to forgive you for not being an amazing human.
I actually remember this. You probably don't, but somewhere along the way, we were involved in a hiring process somewhere, and you were pretty adamant about not hiring someone because in your mind, you didn't think the candidate was being honest about why they wanted to join the company or why they wanted the job. They were giving you the standard, well, it's such an exciting role and can't wait to, all this sort of stuff. And you kind of read between the lines that there's something else going on. And if that person had just said, look, here's my deal, here's what I'm trying to achieve, you probably would have quite liked the person.
Yeah, yeah. I actually experienced this quite a lot. I mean, um, I just experienced this not too long ago. Actually, we had somebody in, and team really liked them, and everybody really liked them. And quite frankly, I wanted to like them badly, but I kind of felt like the conversation was a little bit practiced and way too rehearsed, and I was hearing what I wanted to hear, but instinctively not what I needed to hear. And yeah, I think you know people just need to be people, and for us that have been around people long enough and everything else, you see a little bit through that, and you don't want your spider senses tingling in the wrong direction. All I want to know is that it's in your heart, it's in your head, and every bit of your waking moments, and the desire and the energy that you want to put forth is for the good of our business and our people and everything else. But I don't need the narrative or the rhetoric or all the stuff in between anymore.
So back to your original question, what was my response to Jason Lemkin's thing about slow rep response? Here's my answer. I said, it's funny. I'd never worked for a company that was slow to follow up with me during the interview process, or ghosted me, or made promises about the process that weren't real, or had people interview me who weren't prepared, or asked me lame ass questions, or gave me an offer lower than we talked about. And yet, this is all far more common and worse than a sales rep being slow to follow up.
See, there you go. And you wonder why we love your commentary. That's
And it just,
genius.
I tell you what, I don't know why, it just pisses me off. This kind of, holier than thou, if this rep doesn't follow up in half an hour, what sort of rep are they? And yet the companies are the worst people at just terrible hiring processes.
Yeah.
And the way that I actually put it more positively is, if you want to attract A players, you have to have an A player mentality about how you attract them, and not sit back there and somehow think that these guys are going to flood to you, because they won't, right?
Yeah.
And kind of the wider question I had for you is thinking, like, what does it take to attract A players? Like, what, when you're thinking about, there's people that you want to go after at different companies that you've heard about, or things like that. What kicks in the Amezcua world to say that's someone we need to figure out how we get?
Yeah. I think transparency means a lot. I think to people, I mean, to your point, I mean, you get on these platforms and you know, see what everybody wants you to see, and you hear what everybody wants you to hear, and everything looks amazing and everything else. And look, at the end of the day, a lot of what we do every day is a grind, right? I think you go attract people with good people. That's first and foremost, right? People want to be around other great people, and it doesn't matter who you, or what you do and where you do it, as long as you're doing, but what does matter is who you do it with and who you do it for, whether it's at home, or or in the workplace. And we all know that greatness wants to be surrounded by other greatness, and mediocrity drives everybody away. And so I think operating with a mode of transparency. I don't try and talk anybody into being wherever I am. What I do is just tell them how it is, you know, and tell them what we need, and tell them that we're going to do everything that we can to love them and appreciate them and grow them and support them. And like we talked about earlier, pay them, in ways that are commensurate with their effort. And, what we tend to find is that, the good people are attracted to that narrative like moths to a flame, right? What the good people don't want to be is sold on something, right? Just like your customers, strangely. Everybody wants to be led to buy, and the people that want to buy into your company and your vision and your narrative and your direction, want to be led to go, want to be a part of that. They don't want to be told what they need to be a part of, right? So that's how I like to handle it. And I've been blessed, every bit of my career to be surrounded by amazing people.
No doubt, no doubt. So anyone listening in, what do you want, comments or questions for Rob, put them in the chat or wherever it's there, I think on the right hand side. So as I said, this is the first time doing a live. Somewhere on here, it should tell me how many folks and all the rest of it. I'm sure it's millions, Rob, tuning into this.
Millions. Yeah.
But I can't see. I see a couple of comments. Obviously, Ashes is one. So anyway, drop them in if you got questions. If you want to give Rob a high five about some of his comments, just go ahead and do that. We'd love to see the comments coming in right there. Let's move on to a slightly different tone here, Rob. It's time for a section that I call Visionary or High. I'm going to throw out some bold predictions about the future of sales and cybersecurity sales. And you tell me, am I a deep thinking, insightful visionary? Or did I wake and bake with some fine Colorado glue this morning before I got to my desk? That was easy for me to say. And for those that don't know, Colorado Gorilla Glue, look up in ChatGPT. Apparently, it's one of the more popular strains in Colorado. So, am I a visionary?
Do not do that on your corporate device, though. Yeah, do it only on your personal device.
Any Force Cut people listening, do not do it on your corporate laptop.
Yeah.
So am I a visionary or am I Colorado High? Are you ready to go, Rob?
I'm ready to go.
By 2030, so what's that, 5 years, 80% of cybersecurity purchases under 100K will happen without a human seller or a human buyer, just AI agents buying and selling. Visionary or very high?
Very high.
I
hope you're very high. I hope you're very high. Yeah, I'm old school, man. I still believe that, people is what the buying and selling process should look like. And boy, if it gets to bot selling, bot sellers selling bot buyers for everything under 100K, then I hope you and I are just doing this every single day, talking about what the good old days were like. That's for sure.
We're teaching the bots.
Yeah, teaching the bots.
Would you put so 100K might not be where it is. Where would you put the bar? Like 20K, 50K, 2K?
Can I put the bar at no K?
Not okay.
Do you want this? Do you want this for the industry?
I don't want it, but at some level, it's like saying, for my line, it's like saying, back in the day, people would never buy anything on the internet, right? Because there's all sorts of reasons why you wouldn't put your credit card into a website and things like this, right? It kind of happens, and people buy cars and houses on websites now, it seems, right? So
people would never get in a car without a driver. How's that?
There you go, right?
And yet, what did we see last week or week before?
So I don't know. It feels like to say never is I don't think is real, right? Because people buy stuff online right now. But 100K is a lot. That's really high, right? So I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe the lower end of that somewhere.
Yeah, the lower end of that is for sure. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. ChatGPT is quite a good friend of mine. With respect to personal things, and I don't use it a ton in the workplace. But I did just ask it to plan me a trip the other day, and if it could have sold me the trip in the same process, I might have bought it from it. So there is that. So maybe.
All right, next one. In 5 years' time, more CISOs will report to CFOs than to CIOs and CEOs, and sales will shift to being a finance-first discussion. Visionary or high?
Somewhere in between.
Secondhand smoke?
Yeah, maybe I don't know what's in between, but maybe it's the mushrooms or something. I don't know. But I think this is already happening to some degree. I haven't seen a huge trend in terms of the reporting lines, but I think we are seeing some trends with respect to the decisioning, where security is becoming a larger line item for spend, is the reality. It's used to be, all the buckets were very separate. Now, security is no longer a vertical bucket. It's more of a horizontal line across all budgets. You think about just in the development process, you think about in the infrastructure, you think about the network, the connectivity, the devices themselves, the endpoints, and, it just kind of goes across every bit of the line. I think it's becoming a bigger part of the overall financial equation, and I think you tend to see it become, not just about need, not just about compliance, not just about regulatory, not just about best practice, but you see it becoming very financial. And so I think a little bit of a mix of both, but those reporting lines, not super sure.
Yeah, it seems
What
like
do you think?
it's become more financial in the last 3 or 4 years for sure.
Hmm.
Everyone's feeling that right now is pretty healthy questions such as why would we do this in 6 months? We got something else that's 70% good enough. These impassionate kind of questions are being asked. To say a report to CFO, I think is a bit of a stretch, maybe, but some people might, depending on the culture in their organization, view that as a positive compared to
Hmm.
where they're reporting right now. Right? They may be wishing that they reported into the CFO, but I think in general it's a stretch to say that.
Yeah.
But I think the scrutiny is probably here to stay from now on.
Yeah.
All
Totally.
right, two more questions. Last two. In 10 years' time, both the RSA conference and Black Hat will be dead, completely gone. Is that visionary or am I high as a kite?
I think you're high. I think those things have stood the test of time. I mean, you were at RSA, I was at RSA. I would say it's still a very vibrant security community. Um, I think like just about anything else, I think they'll morph a little bit. I think they'll modernize. I think they'll find ways to be relevant. But again, like we talked about before, I mean, people love being around other people. Like in this industry, and one of the reasons why guys like you and I have stayed in this so long, I would imagine, is it feels like family. Like I go back to RSA, and it kind of feels like I'm going to a family reunion. You walk down the street, you see people that you haven't seen, you see people that you interacted, you see people who you grew up with in this career. You know their families, your friends. um, I don't think, and I think that goes well beyond us. I think that goes for the practitioners too. I think in a lot of ways they show up not for the show and the circus and the circumstance, but they show up to be with one another and to engage with one another. And I think that networking aspect of it, that, you know, I don't want to say misery because, I don't think our industry is filled with misery, but that challenge that we all have that we share, loves company. And, I think they're great. I think I love going there and showing up and seeing all the friendly faces from the past. But
Yeah, I don't feel it's going to go away, but I think it's going to change a little bit because it's,
yeah,
as someone said to me at RSA, I've been coming here for 20 years and it's pretty much the same conference as it was 20 years ago. I'm sure
yeah,
there are differences, but it seemed like this person anyway, it was very much the same place.
yeah.
And
I think what does need to change a little bit, this might be slightly controversial, is it's got to change is on the vendor side of things, right? With respect to, um, I mean, it really is actually a cybersecurity circus now. I mean, you go on the floor and, it's some guy's got snow in their booth and somebody's got a robot, or somebody's got a space alien, or somebody's got a whatever. Like, I mean, it's like sensory overload. And, I think we got to dial it down a bit. Everybody, like, we got to stop starving for attention and really get back to the value oriented nature where that conference really started. Because I think a lot of the value stuff occurs in small rooms and small constructs and off the show floor and things like that. And I think the cost equation of it for the vendor community actually is starting to get a little out of control too. Like, it's a
yeah,
very expensive endeavor for all of us, right?
yeah, I'm telling you, add in the booth and the setup and the people and the travel and the dinners and the hotel rooms and whatever. It's a multiple $100,000 gig for most companies.
Oh yeah, but I bet it's quite a moneymaker for San Francisco. So
And for Crosspoint Ventures, right, Rob? So last question for you. Recently, Google acquired or announced they're acquiring Wiz, and some hacks in the industry called the combo G Wiz. So prediction for you: within 12 months, and this is for Ash if he's still on the call as well. So within 12 months, Island, the enterprise browser company, will acquire the CyberHeart platform from Dows Technologies and rename the company Love Island. Am I visionary or am I high as a kite?
I hope you're a visionary because that's a hell of a marketing message. But yeah, I don't. Oh, that sounds like a trick question to me. But
Oh, you think so? No, I think it's
yeah,
meant to be. It's one of these,
it is meant to be.
it's the
Yeah,
perfect
yeah.
marriage. Talking about love, right? It's the
It is the
perfect
perfect
marriage.
marriage. Yeah, Love Island.
There's a TV show in the UK called Love Island, which is popular. I don't know if it's over here or not, but
Yeah, I think it is. I don't. I mean, let me go check my. Let me go ask my wife. She's probably watched it a couple times. Yeah.
you're telling me you don't watch Love Island, Rob? I don't believe you for a moment.
No, I don't.
Well, on that note, Rob Amezcua, thanks so much for joining us today. Any final thoughts or comments before we sign off?
Man, I love being here with you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for all the challenging questions. Thanks for your insights. Keep your commentary rolling on LinkedIn because it's really one of my favorite parts of logging on every day is see what Andrew has commented on and what's going to come next. I think you could actually just make a content career out of your commentary, but keep up the good work.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate the comments. Look forward to bumping into you probably at Black Hat or somewhere else, and maybe do this one more time somewhere in a
I'm
different
sure we'll see
environment.
you soon. Yeah, absolutely. We should get Ash and some others on here too.
I like that idea. All right, then. Thanks, Rob.
Good to see you.